Hello and welcome to India Global. I'm Gauri Dwivedi. This is a show that tells you how Indians view the world. But first up, the headlines. Prime Minister Modi will visit Poland and Ukraine. He'll be the first Indian leader to visit Poland in 40 years. Prime Minister Modi's Ukraine visit comes a month after Russia visit. The visit also seeks great significance in the backdrop of Ukraine's incursions into Russian territory. Malaysian Prime Minister Ibrahim on a 3-day visit to India. The focus will be on palm oil and defence along with maritime security. Malaysian Prime Minister's visit will also reset India-Malaysia ties. The meeting with Prime Minister Modi holds special significance. No polls until reforms. That's the big word coming from Bangladesh's Yunus government. The interim government says that it's committed to hold fair elections, but that will have to wait. Top priority is to control law and order situation, but a delay in elections has huge significance for Bangladesh in the transition period. US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in Israel amidst fresh push for a Gaza ceasefire. The US Secretary of State will be meeting Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He says this is the last opportunity to rescue the Israeli hostages that have been in captivity of Hamas since the 7th of October. And China-Vietnam signed a 14 deal. They signed 14 deals from rails to crocodiles. China-Vietnam have also agreed to build closer partnership, which will have significance from economy to their maritime engagement. That we are tracking on India Global is Prime Minister Modi's trip to Poland and Ukraine. It assumes great significance in the backdrop of the fact that this is the first visit of any Indian leader in the last 40 years to Poland. This visit also could have huge ramifications for how India plans to play a strategic and significant role as far as leader of the Global South in trying to put an end to some of the most contentious conflicts that are playing out right now, which is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. How it plays out remains to be seen, but the fact that Prime Minister Modi will be there in Poland and then later on in Ukraine this week does indicate that there could be some fresh, renewed effort as far as getting some peace talks forward. Remember the last time that the peace talks effort was made in Switzerland, the peace summit fell flat with, of course, no presence of Russia being one of the key reasons why the peace summit failed to have any major breakthrough in terms of reaching a conclusion or a possible ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. Let's first listen in to the press conference by External Affairs Ministry spokesperson.
Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi will be undertaking an official visit to Poland this week on 21st and 22nd August at the invitation of Prime Minister His Excellency Donald Tusk. This is a landmark visit as Prime Minister of India is visiting Poland after 45 years. The visit takes place as we also mark the 70th anniversary of the establishment of our diplomatic relations between India and Poland.
Shifting focus now to the big story that we are tracking right now, which is Malaysian Prime Minister's visit to India. It's a 3-day visit where a lot is likely to happen, and there's a lot on the plate. In fact, everything from the economy to maritime security to, of course, whether there's going to be larger connection in terms of regional and global issues where India and Malaysia could also come together. Besides, of course, the BRICS membership of Malaysia as well. Remember, India is the founding member of the BRICS, and that could be one of the issues that could come up in the 3-day summit and the 3-day meeting that will be held by Malaysian Prime Minister. The big questions that we are raising here on India Global, which is that What is the kind of pitch? What is the kind of pitch that Malaysia Prime Minister will be making for Indian investments, whether it's in the electric vehicle space or in the artificial intelligence space? Remember, EV is an area where Malaysia has been wanting to make great progress but hasn't been able to do so. Second is the palm oil imports. India has been importing a lot of palm oil, but that imports actually reduced given the rant of the predecessor of Ibrahim in the wake of his comments around Kashmir. So how that will pan out is another key question. Zakir Naik's extradition still remains a matter of key concern for India. It still remains unresolved. Remember, Zakir Naik is in Malaysia, and whether or not Malaysia will be able to address India's concerns around it is one of the issues that we are hoping we could find some sort of breakthrough on that as well. Let's get in Rahul Mishra, Senior Research Fellow, joining me live from Damsat University in Bangkok. He's the Associate Professor at the Center for Indo-Pacific Studies, joining me from New Delhi. All right, Mr. Mishra, if you can hear me, sir.
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, Professor Mishra, thanks so much for speaking to me on India Global. My first question to you, sir, is how do you view this important visit that is coming in at a time when India-Malaysia ties, they've been warm, but there seems to be a lot of, there is a lot of potential, but that is still sort of unmet so far?
Well, this visit is very important for two reasons. One, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, this is his first visit since 2022 as Prime Minister, but also the first visit since 2018. So last time when a Malaysian Prime Minister visited India was 2018, and that was Najib Razak. So past 6 years, the relationship has gone several ups and downs, a roller coaster ride, as it were. But I must say that the foreign ministries of both these countries have been trying very hard to normalize relations. And this visit will give a fillip, perhaps move it to the next level in terms of warmth, bringing warmth in the relationship, but also making it more robust, more multi-sectoral, as both the sides have been saying.
Okay, so there's a lot that could be achieved in this visit, everything from food security to semiconductors, to also, of course, efforts by Malaysia to have a larger presence in terms of de-dollarizing its trade, so to say. How much of that would you put in terms of priorities? Do you think semiconductors could be right up there in terms of partnership and collaborations between India and Malaysia?
Absolutely. Malaysia has recently come up with its own semiconductor policy. And Prime Minister Modi has also been talking about it over and again. So I think in that context, the semiconductor partnership could be a very important, perhaps the most important element of this partnership. But I would give equal weightage to trade and tourism linkages. Both the sides have issued gratis visa to tourists from their countries. And this has led to a jump of 165% in Indian outbound tourists to Malaysia. And well, India issued this gratis visa just a couple of months back. And that has also led to more Malaysian tourists coming to India. If you look at the Prime Minister's delegation coming to India, it is very clear that trade, investment, tourism is going to be a very important sector. Investment, semiconductor and digital technologies, and also higher education, which is one of the key important areas for India and Malaysia in terms of their cooperation. India is also setting up an IIT in Penang, in Malaysia. So I think higher education is another very important sector.
Okay. So, one is, of course, the trade partnerships, and there's a lot, and you can see some of those figures and some of those areas also on our screen. But Professor Mishra, I have a larger question. Malaysia also sits in the Indo-Pacific. As far as the India-Malaysia ties and their larger vision for Asia and the global south is concerned, do you see that coming together? Do you see these two countries can actually play a much larger role? That could be not just trade related, but also in strategic and security areas?
Well, Malaysia has traditionally been perhaps the most important partner for India, starting with the personal relationship that Nehru had with Tunku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of Malaysia, followed by Malaysia and India's strong adherence to non-alignment policy during Tun Abdul Razak and in India, Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi. So I think traditionally both Malaysia and India follow this non-alignment policy, which is now turned into a multi-alignment approach. Malaysia is more interested now in joining the Global South narrative, being a part of Global South institutions. And BRICS, of course, is a very important platform in that regard. And India being a founder member, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, can bring them together to bolster their partnership. Also, it is very important to highlight that Malaysia is one of the founding members of ASEAN, which keeps ASEAN very neutral in the sense that they are not driven by power politics between the US and China. And this is something that India has also been supporting for past several years. So there is really a lot that can be done together.
And there's a lot that we could discuss, but we're going to come back to this maybe on another time. But India, ASEAN, India, Malaysia, ASEAN BRICS, there are a whole host of things we can discuss. But thanks so much for speaking to me. We're slipping into a very short break. We come back on the other side of this break with lots more. And the debate number 2 on India Global, which is that Mohammad Yunus has a long-term plan for Bangladesh. Where elections sit in that long-term plan is the key question. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching India Global with me, Gauri Dwivedi. The second big debate that we're having today is around what happens to Bangladesh, the transition period. How long will it last? Remember, when the interim government was formed, the first thing that Mohammad Yunus said, and it was expected that this would be a short transition phase for Bangladesh before elections are held, and that is when democracy would be restated. But as things stand right now, Mohammad Yunus had said, the interim government caretaker has said that the reform agenda is long-term. He has said that there is meaningful and deep reforms which will turn the country into a real and thriving democracy. He said that this task is huge but doable. But this also means that this is a long-term task. This cannot be done overnight. So does this mean that Bangladesh will transition to a democracy over a long period of time? And in the interim, Bangladesh and the flux in its politics would probably continue, and there will be no let up in terms of the transition that it needs to make, the quick transition that it had to make towards having elections and returning to a democratic framework. That's our big question that we are having today on India Global. Joining me is Muqtadir Rashid, senior journalist from Bangladesh, and Veena Sikri. We'll get her in just a bit, but Muqtadir Rashid, let me come to you first, sir. As things stand right now, Mohammad Yunus has made it quite clear that return to democracy would take some time. And in fact, that's a question that I'm going to get to Muqtadir Rashid in just a bit, but I want to tell our viewers right now, which is that Mohammad Yunus made a very long speech in front of diplomats. There were 50 diplomats, including the Indian High Commissioner as well. And in front of all those diplomats and the global audience, essentially, the message that has been sent out by the interim government caretaker Prime Minister is very clear, which is that Bangladesh will return to democracy, but there is no date so far. So how long will this interim government last? Could it be months? Or could it be years? That is a key question, and that's a worry, because let's be very clear here. If there were allegations around Sheikh Hasina being a dictator, there is also a very simple reality right now, which is that Mohammad Yunus, in his caretaker and interim government, is also not an elected one. So the sooner they transition to democracy, the more ideal stance it will be for Bangladesh as a whole, and also to ensure that the several factions that exist within the Bangladeshi society and politics would also find a common meeting ground. The political fabric of Bangladesh, which has been completely destroyed in the last 2 weeks or so, the first step towards restoring that has to be the transition towards fresh elections. There were allegations that Sheikh Hasina's election earlier this year, the election victory earlier this year in January, was rigged. The only way to address those allegations is to have a free and fair election at the very earliest. How long will Bangladeshis have to wait remains to be seen. Mohammad Yunus has also said that there's been a generation of Bangladeshis who've not been able to vote in a free and fair election. And the first thing he should do is address that anomaly. Okay, Muqtadir Rashid is with us on the broadcast. Mr. Rashid, I want to ask you this, that if one were to read Mohammad Yunus's comments, it's quite clear, or probably it's indicative of the fact that elections may be on the horizon, but not clear as to when it could happen.
Well, Bangladesh people right now, that they are not very much worried about the election, when it will gonna happen and will not be happen, because the successive last three election, what we have seen, that was the ridiculous election, that was a dummy election, that was one-sided election, all the election we have seen. So for now, Bangladeshi people, what I understand, I talk to so many people, all walks of people, they are, the first priority is not the election. Right now, their first priority is inflation. So the inflation is a big problem right at this point in Bangladesh. The law and order situation is another big problem for Bangladesh. So for Bangladesh, the economic situation is another big problem for Bangladesh. And unemployment. And now city, if you see Dhaka, everywhere there is a protest for the discrimination. The hundreds of thousands of people are gathering everywhere and saying, look, last few years you cannot hold any kind of protest. Now we are protesting because we are a victim of discrimination. So these are the situation. The priority, if you say, one of the biggest priority for Mr. Yunus is not to hold an election. It is one of the biggest challenges, I would say, to maintain the law in a situation. So, you have already heard that what he said, that after the reform of judiciary and after the reform of media. So, of course, we need to see what's going on in the coming days. We can, if we can wait for like 15 years for an election, so we can wait for 1 or 2 years, definitely for the election, but not the priority right at this point.
Okay. So Veena Sikri, India's former High Commissioner to Bangladesh, also joins me on the broadcast. Ambassador Sikri, now banking reforms, judicial reforms, media reforms, one reads the long list, it clearly does seem to suggest that there's no hurry as far as holding those elections are concerned. So how do you see this phase for Bangladesh lasting?
I think it's a worrisome phase, because we must remember that in the last 2 weeks, the movement after 15 July, which culminated in the ouster of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina on the 5th of August, the prime positions were, there have been no elections, we must have elections. We all know that the 2009 elections were considered among the freest and the fairest in Bangladesh after, the liberation war. So that's why to say that there are no elections is another matter. The last election and the election before that, the BNP chose not to participate. So that's another question. But I think the biggest worry, as pointed out also by Mr. Rashid, is that there's a complete breakdown of law and order. And we are worried, why is this happening? Because there is the army, there is the police, but neither seem to be willing to take action. There is a big talk in Dhaka everywhere that it is the Jamaat-e-Islami behind the power behind the throne is the Jamaat-e-Islami, and they are doing what they would like to do in the rural areas, and there is nobody to control them, because there is a police force, there is the army, but nobody is coming forward. And the worry is that the killings are continuing and the disturbances in the rural areas are continuing. Some are saying the police stations are not manned, some are saying, so this is a matter of real worry. I think it would be important to control the law and order situation with the forces at the command of the government itself. And of course, people are also saying that the interim government has to have its own, shall I say, judicial reason for existence, because at the present moment, in the interim government is not mentioned in the constitution anywhere. So I think the whole question of how will you include that in the constitution, is the constitution going to be changed? All these questions are very important. And I think that...
I was coming to just that, Ambassador Sikri, I was coming to just that none of the reforms cannot take place along with an election or after an elected government comes to power. So what is it that is holding the elections back? Is there some other areas that Mohammad Yunus and his government wants to focus on first, and then the democracy and the whole democratic framework will be restored?
I do think that according to the statements made by President Mohammad Yunus and all the other people who have been involved, democracy is the priority. Democracy and elections were the absolute priority mentioned on all occasions. I've been on so many talk shows with colleagues and everybody mentioned democracy and elections as priority. So I think they should remain the priority. Any delay in elections will be misunderstood. Of course, the world community, is being built up to say that there are no elections. But I think it's important to understand that elections are the essence of democracy. And if Bangladesh wants to be known as a constitutional democracy the world over, then it is important to have the elections. But if there are some other factors, like the talk I mentioned about Jamaat-e-Islami being the real power behind the throne, Jamaat-e-Islami has never been interested in elections.
Exactly. That's a worry. That's a worry. This was always meant to be a transition phase, and transitions need to come and go, and it has to end very quickly. Thanks so much, Ambassador Sikri and Mr. Rashid, for speaking to me on India Global. Let's shift our focus now to Ukraine and, of course, to Poland, where Prime Minister Modi is set to be. My colleague Vishnu Som joins me live from Warsaw. Vishnu, this is a very important visit, the first in 40 years for Indian leader. Talk to us about the significance of it and take us through what is expected.
Well, it is a very, very important visit, as you say. It's the first time in 45 years that an Indian Prime Minister is coming to Poland. There are two parts of this visit. Prime Minister Modi comes over here to Warsaw and then he travels to Kiev, Ukraine. We'll be covering both aspects of this very important visit. But let's talk about Ukraine a little later. Let's first talk about Poland. India and Poland have a very important historic relationship. There's a developing economic relationship, and the historic connect of Indian soldiers fighting fighting together with Polish soldiers in some of the great battles of the Second World War, including the historic Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy, which we've reported on. The legacy of that extensively is something which the Prime Minister will be reflecting on. Quite apart from that, there were upwards of 6,000 Polish women and children who had taken refuge in India when royal families in two parts of India had ensured that they were protected at a time when the Second World War was going on. There have been visits by foreign ministers of the country. There's been a visit in the past by the Polish Prime Minister as well, but it's been a long time since an Indian Prime Minister has been over here. So both sides looking to step up that relationship. And there are, there's a cultural relationship as well. The Indian Council for Cultural Relations ensures that there is a thriving aspect of India's diplomacy with Poland is that cultural link. That's number one. Number two, after spending approximately 24 hours over here, the Prime Minister will be traveling by a special train to Kiev, Ukraine. He will be in Kiev for only 8 hours. It is a high security situation over there, and it's a visit that takes significance because it comes shortly after the Prime Minister visited Moscow. So the message is quite clear. In as much as India looks closely at the relationship with Moscow, with Russia, the relationship with Ukraine equally important, particularly at a time when India and the Prime Minister specifically have repeatedly been calling for peace.
All right, Vishnu, thanks so much for giving us what lies ahead in terms of Prime Minister Modi's historic visit first to Poland and Ukraine. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Global. Thanks so much for watching.